Okay. All right. So I'm going to say it again. So I'm Joy, of course. And I've got Nikki here, and Nikki Aiello is my friend for how many years now? We met in 2012, I want to say.
You're better with that. Yep. So 8 years.
Okay. So 8 years. And we are both, spiritual seekers, students of yoga. Nikki Aiello is a recovery and life transition coach. She's also a student of yoga psychology. That's how we met, yoga philosophy. And she's going to explain what that is to us. But so we're fellow coaches and just students on the path of life and yoga and everything that entails, right? And we both have our personal experiences, that life experiences that brought us to this place and to these teachings. So I just want to take a moment and let you, Nikki, kind of tell us a little bit about you. It's a big topic, I know, but just a little bit about maybe your story a little bit, how you got here, and then explain what a recovery life coach is. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sure. Yep. I'll do that. Mm-hmm. So my name's Nikki Aiello. I'm based here in Denver, Colorado. Joy and I met back in Los Angeles, 2012, studying a really great course together. And I've been here about 5 years. I started my coaching practice about 3 years ago. I've been teaching yoga for over 12. And I'm going to actually define yoga, recovery and life transition coach first, and then tell you about how I got here. So I've defined recovery. A lot of people just instantly associate it with substance abuse and addiction. And although I have expertise in working in that area, I've also found that recovery from anything destabilizing has a lot of similar aspects, especially in how to get back on center. So I've defined it as recovery is restoring balance after having lost it. And life transition, basically, you often lose your balance when you're going through a major life transition, especially if it's like sprung on you, or something unexpected, which is something unexpected, or whatever, something that you've just kind of been, stuck in and you haven't moved, because, sometimes people freeze, sometimes people flee, when a lot of stress comes up. So I help in those two realms. And some examples of life transitions that I've come across with some of my clients are like a new phase of life. So entering, like retirement, and you no longer have to be identified by your job and your kids and being a mother or father and all of that. And it's like, oh, well, now it's time for me. And I don't even know how to do that, and maybe having self-care is a big one, like learning how to care for myself. And just to live in balance, mind, body, and spirit, figuring out what that is for individuals individually is kind of tricky. Some people just haven't sat down to really introspect, and then some other examples, being diagnosed with something that's going to be life-changing, whether it's acute or chronic. It can definitely throw you, set you spinning. Sometimes it can, your identity and just your lifestyle, whatever it's going to affect. So coming to terms with that and just shifting for a little while or long term to deal with that. A divorce, a breakup, and of course, substance abuse. And I prefer to work more with people who are further along in their recovery rather than actively using. It also kind of depends on their substance, whatever it is in their life. If it's something really, really life-threatening, then for sure, like, treatment is essential, first and foremost. So somebody's just trying to kind of stop drinking. They feel like they drink a little bit too much. I can work within that realm. So it's kind of a spectrum, but I have experience in that area too with alcohol and drug abuse in my past. And that's a big one, to learn to live, as sober, or even just differently, just differently. So much goes along with changing your lifestyle to not be doing that. Some other examples of a big move, move to somewhere new, and, having to just start so many things over and find your resources and find your groove. Job loss, a lot of it is kind of boils down to identity often. I think that you could probably
Yeah.
have decent conversation about attachments to our identity and beliefs and stuff like that, and how that gets shattered sometimes. So those are the different sort of life transitions that I've discovered are very parallel.
Yeah.
So my personal story is, like I said, I have experience with substance abuse and alcohol. Addiction is a tricky word. I prefer abuse, substance abuse. It's a substance that some people, and even me sometimes, can have an okay relationship with. But then there's also that same substance, you can abuse it, and therefore you abuse yourself. Mm-hmm. So I choose that word, because addiction can be just interpreted in different ways that I don't think are supportive to what I do. And that started at an early age, alcohol mainly. And I would say that one was the most destructive, because it's so long term. And when you start young, it can just, really affect your development.
Yeah.
Drugs came in later on, and that for sure can just really, set you haywire, and just really felt like I was short circuiting and stuff. But over a decade of alcohol use and abuse, and then drugs came into the picture, and that really intensified. I won't say it's what started it, because I think I had underlying, obviously, I had underlying issues, imbalances that were making the alcohol seem like they were bringing me balance. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, the depression that I dealt with from an early age just got stronger and stronger and stronger, and more debilitating and more debilitating. And for so long, I didn't even know that I had this thing, that I had this underlying thing. You just don't know sometimes when you're not exposed to education and resources. So it ultimately, though, did get started to affect my life so much that I decided that I had to, make a huge change, go get help. And intuitively, I was weaning off things anyway. I knew that, drugs and alcohol weren't helping. Mm-hmm. So I was weaning, as I was also isolating. Just the world itself was getting just too much for me to navigate and pretend I was okay. There was a lot of pretending, a lot of faking it. Eventually I just couldn't. So I just had to kind of go into hiding and just do my best to work and pay my bills and try and find my path.
Yeah.
And it was, my brain just felt like it was, the image that came to mind a lot was like a computer circuit board, and somebody just poured orange juice all over it. It was sticky, sugary, horrible, just mess, and just shit would not work and fire correctly. And I think it's because I love those sweet things, and sugar and alcohol, those things, they'll do that to your brain in a way, it seemed, and your brain is like a circuit board. So I took action. Ultimately, the life gave me an opportunity to relocate, to move somewhere and focus on my physical, mental, and emotional health, which was Phoenix, Arizona. I went from the East Coast, where I was, to Phoenix. And like I said, intuitively, I was being, driven towards things, yoga being one of the first primary ones. And that started in Denver before I even went to the East Coast, little by little. And then Phoenix, when I moved there, I just dove headfirst into it as I quit drinking completely. And it wasn't that I was craving, that I needed the physical aspects of yoga. It wasn't that. It was my little voice in my head was just saying, get into yoga, for this, because it knew, somehow I knew that yoga was about this and not everything else.
Yeah.
Even though I'd never really been told that per se. And I found an amazing studio in Phoenix. It just happened to be around the corner from where I was staying with my sister. It had just opened its doors. It was just very serendipitous how it all lined up. I was the first student in the door. I was their first, work trade. It was my home. It was my second home for a really long time, as I went through a really horrible, I call it my ugly duckling stage. And then I finally detox and ugh, like literally like detoxing physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I was just so happy that I had a place where that, there's love and
Yeah.
non-judgment as much as people, can be, can practice there. So that was amazing and beautiful. And I also got very much into studying nutrition. Huge. Again, just this part of me was like, this is big. I didn't want to go on pharmaceutical medication unless I explored all other options. Because I still am. I feel like the pharmaceutical industry is very corrupt and people are overprescribed, and there's a place for it, but it's also a place where it's just taking advantage. It's like a pariah. So I wanted to do everything I could, and I knew nutrition was huge. So I started studying a lot of that on my own. I started finding, I paid out of pocket for everything. I went to find functional medicine doctors, alternative medicine, anybody who I knew would help me straighten out my biochemistry rather than instantly putting me on medication. But some of them didn't even have the ability to prescribe anyway. So a ton of nutrition, biochemistry, rebalancing, yoga, exercise. I got really into hiking and rollerblading, therapy. I found a great, therapist who was willing to, work with me on a sliding scale. I was in 12-step program, that's for a while. And, sunshine, I was in Phoenix. That was ideal. And also just to dry out in the desert. It's like, couldn't have been more perfect. I just felt like I was pickled. So
Right.
it helped to do all that. And those were a lot of my primary resources that and fundamental like building blocks to start over.
Yeah.
And obviously it worked out pretty well. Like I'm in a good place these days. And recovery also, as one of my best friends put it, my dearest friend, recovery is not a door you walk through. It's a house that you maintain forever.
Yeah.
So, I practice what I preach in all areas of my life all the time. And I'm not perfect by any means, but I am passionate about helping people who are going through that honestly really torturous, phase. Some it's worse than others. Mine was hugely humbling and just awful. I'm passionate about helping them get all of those pieces that I just named in place, because physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, they all need to be part of the program, and it can be really overwhelming. Like not everybody, has, like me, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I had I had a lot of things line up that gave me the ability to have freedom to focus on myself and be selfish for a while. Yeah. And that can be hard for people with other responsibilities. Like how am I going to find a therapist? How am I going to, great, thanks for all the nutritional advice, but now I have to change everything about how I eat and structure my day. What am I going to do for exercise? What are these exercises you're giving me? Yoga, just so many things. It can be overwhelming. And finding the right doctors, the right referrals. And I feel like I could have saved a lot of time, energy, and money if I had somebody like me helping me along.
Is that what your recovery process is about? Like you're helping people do you have a process you take people through, or and you're incorporating all of your life experience, sort of the best practices that feed these layers of our being, body, mind, soul. So
I do.
So how does go ahead. So how does that start? Like when someone comes to you, and I know there's a whole process. I don't expect you to explain it all, but just what's that? Yeah.
I do a pretty extensive intake, assessment of where they currently are physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and what their goals are. Those are two big things we kind of get sorted out. And often their goals are mixed up. They're not even quite sure yet. So I help them figure that out too. But at that moment, kind of in general, what is it that you're feeling drawn to? And, so some people are, they're okay physically, but they've got, like emotionally, they're, really off, or vice versa. So really assess and see where their needs are. And like I mentioned before, all of those things that work for me, I'm a lot about bringing a team together of professionals,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
I feel like my expertise is in organizing and, you know, relationship wise, and being intuitive and being supportive. And, you know, I definitely have gifts as far as working with an individual and helping them along and getting, you know, tapping into their truth and wisdom and giving great reflection, but I'm not a therapist.
Right.
And, you know, I have training in nutrition and Ayurveda, which is the Indian science of nutrition and lifestyle, but I'm not a nutritionist. So I am a huge proponent of finding a functional medicine doctor and getting lab work and getting a nutritionist to get you dialed into what you need right now.
Yeah.
I encourage that honestly for everybody. So, you know, I like to bring the team together of whomever they need. And, you know, maybe they need a certain type of massage or body worker. Maybe they need a psychiatrist, you know, maybe they're, you know, in need of pharmaceutical help, possibly. And helping them figure out, I do have training in individualized yoga therapy. So putting together, and you know that, we did that together, putting together the right practice for them. And that may even just be a walk, a breathing technique, and a 5-minute meditation. It doesn't have to be, you know, warriors and downward dogs.
Right.
It's whatever is going to work for somebody, to be stable and consistent. So it's an assessment, a very deep, thorough assessment at the beginning. That's where most of the time and energy kind of happens up front. Come together with a practice, connect them to, you know, different resources that they need. And then at that point, it's weekly check-ins. And we, you know, we see where their wins were, first and foremost. You know, what was successful this past week? What were the struggles? And what would you like to accomplish in the next week? And I really help people not bite off more than they can chew.
Which is a big deal. Yes.
It's a huge deal.
You make your practice sustainable and your healing, you know, so it's, we talk about that in yoga therapy, that sustainability.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Otherwise you don't have successes, and without successes, you know, your confidence dips, and then you just, you know, it's defeating.
Yeah.
So that's, and then, you know, depending on how long somebody works for me, I have 3 6-week, 3-month and 6-month packages. So we can change things up. Well, and you know, we have a set plan at the beginning, but it can, you know, it's malleable depending on what shifts or whatever. And definitely the yoga practice could shift halfway through. I like people to figure out something and then stick with it for a decent amount of time, and then see where, you know, like it's so amazing to see my clients grow so much that they're ready to just jump into a whole different, you know, like arena or phase and change things up and go to the next stage.
Yeah.
So then beyond that, it's often I just continue working with them, you know, less frequently, but long term.
Yeah.
But initially it's definitely like a continuous, compassionate, non-judgmental support and accountability coach.
Yeah. Which is so needed. And when you were sharing your story, and, you know, just the humility of your story, because you're saying, look, I have this experience, I have this training, but really what it is you're a little bit further along on the road than that person that might be coming to you. And in yoga, you know, we call that the acharya.
Right.
And so it's not like that guru style or that person that's wanting to run your life as a teacher or mentor or coach, but you're that like wise guide that's able to say, look, I have some hindsight in this, I have some experience. And you're treating, when you said, you know, I do this great assessment of people when they come in. And what I love about more the alternative medicines or the type of healing and teaching that you're doing, the coaching, is you're treating the person, not the problem. So you're really looking at the person as a whole person. And like your coaching is about how do you restore that balance. And so it's not like you could say right now, hey, here's exactly what I do, because you're not cookie cutting it, so to speak. You're treating really the person as they come to you, and through that assessment, what that individual actually needs to restore that balance. I think that's an important distinction, because oftentimes when we go to maybe biomedical doctor, which is not bad, because I go there, we all need that. But sometimes it's that, okay, this is the diagnosis, this is the treatment. Sometimes that's needed. And other times we need more of that, you know, individualized process of healing, what we're talking about, which healing means to be made whole. So I love that you have that definition. So just that idea of treating the person, not the problem, is a complete paradigm shift that I learned through the yoga teaching and yoga therapy. So does that resonate?
For sure. I just love the way that you described all of that.
Yeah, I think
Individualize is for sure the key word.
Absolutely. And because even a problem that maybe is presenting itself in our lives, like maybe you and I have the same presenting problem, but when we get down into what's in the roots of it, what's really the cause of it, the story could be different. We may need different things to really resolve that problem. But you shared so much, and I think when we look at recovery, for me, because with my work with people with who primarily deal with anxiety, but at that higher, like you said, you work with someone who's done sort of that work, or they've gotten a little further along on their path, and they need that support, that guide, sort of to help them manage all the parts, to find that, to be restored to that balance. It's the same thing with anxiety. I really work with that person who already has all those tools, but really wants to have that inner rearrangement of finding that confidence, that inner confidence, wisdom, and joy. No longer really just treating the problem, but finding that solution. And I think you and I agree on this, that the real diagnosis, the deepest diagnosis, is really that disconnection from self. When we look at abuse or whatever it is, like, what do you think causes that? Do you think that idea that we're disconnected from our source or from our truth plays a role in any of this? Do you know what I mean? Like how we get separate from, like you said, we get identified with who we are, these roles, or this idea of who we have to be, or, and that can cause a lot of trouble, because that part of us is always changing, but there's that part of us that's unchanging. So that's what I mean, kind of that Purusha we talk about in yoga.
For sure.
So I think that when we get to that loss of balance in our life, sometimes it comes from that forgetting that stable part of us, and yet we live in the world too. So just that conversation, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people don't even know that there is that stable part.
Yeah.
It's that first time when that light bulb goes on, when you realize that there is this unchanging thing. There is another part of you that's not the mind and the ego and what we identify with. And I think some people never realize that. And obviously you and I know that yoga, that's the essence of yoga, is, the viveka, the discernment between what is real and unchanging and what is not real. Or, that's a tough, not real. Things are real, but
or not permanent, maybe, like
not permanent.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, I mean, it kind of depends on what sort of foundation you have to start with, and then how far away from that you get is going to kind of be your difficulty level in finding peace, so it's different for everybody. Some people have like are more tuned in spiritually, maybe from the get-go, or regardless, it's different for everybody. But the point being, really the answer to most of it is to come back and find your center in some way, shape, or form, and how to really cultivate the relationship and identification with that, so that you're not ruled by the thoughts of what you think you should be, where you should be, how you should be. So there's a place for all of it in our lives, but if this is the only thing we know, and we're constantly just trying to manage what we think we're supposed to be and how and where, then it's just constant stress and comparison, and just like, to have this other unchanging force that we tune back into, it's an unending source of peace.
Yeah.
So to tap into that on a regular basis, we need to find something that helps somebody tap into that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So that they can sense that and have that kind of infuse the other part of our being.
Yes. And I think that's what's so beautiful about, we were going through our studies with Robert. I remember, we were studying yoga therapy with Robert, just to share with everyone, in Los Angeles. Nikki and I were in that program together. And understanding that this healing process, and I think this was the aha moment for me in my life, and it sounds like this is what you help your clients with as well. It's not just the managing of the symptoms, which is where I was kind of stuck in my life, you know, with anxiety or the isms or the addictions or whatever we want to call it, the abuse, you know, it's treating those symptoms. Mm-hmm. Like you said, yeah. And so then it's that path of, okay, how do we calm those symptoms? Because we need to do that, right? We need to manage those symptoms, like you said, but build the new, like really kind of restoring the balances. All the focus can't just be on fixing the symptoms. And I think, you know, when I was in my positive psychology program, it was that statement that really, really stuck with me, but it was on the heels of everything we were learning from Robert. And it was the things that make you less depressed, less anxious, whatever that less is, are not the same things necessarily that will make you thrive, that will make you happy. And that was like a light bulb moment in my life, because that's what yoga is saying when it says vairagyam, which is letting go, surrendering, what is calming, sort of that practice of calming those symptoms, letting those go, stilling those symptoms. And abhyasa, which is the practice of becoming the new or restoring the balance or putting your attention into that. And that was the piece I was missing for a long time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So just speaking, I think that was a lot, but that's so interesting.
And that resonates hugely with me too. Hugely with me. I think both of the light bulbs went off for us that day, you know, those days talking about all of that. You know, as far as, I'm a big proponent of addition before subtraction. You know, in certain cases, stuff needs to be taken out, you know, subtracted right away, depending on the destructive nature and degree of it in our lives. But sometimes to take something away that we know isn't going to support us in moving, you know, forward and further and upward, we need to have something else coming in, you know, maybe beforehand, so that we can start a whole new routine and relationship and practice of something new, so that other thing we can let go and not feel a huge void and fear and anxiety because we don't have this new thing in place. So and that to me in a way also kind of goes with treating symptoms and the root of the problem. You know, both are important. You know, we need to get ourselves in a place of, you know, we need to lower our stress level in order to make changes.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's treat the stress in various ways, whatever works. And let's bring in practices that are going to keep stress low as a life practice, you know, and what you said too about, you know, it's what's going to make you less unhappy. I forget how you phrased it.
The things that make you less anxious or less depressed aren't the things that aren't always the same things that will make you happy or thrive, you know? Yeah.
Which is, actually, that kind of leads me into something I told you I wanted to talk with you about today, and that's positive psychology. And, you know, you went through this course that I really would like to do sometime. I just think it's super profound, the positive psychology course that you can talk a little about in a moment. But, you know, psychology, from what I've learned in our studies, used to be so much based, well, actually, initially, from what I've learned, it was the study of the potential of the mind, you know, what our mind can do, you know, the brain, what it is really capable of. And then at whatever point in time, funding for those studies changed to studying disease. So all of the money went into scientific, you know, research went into study of disease and halted, you know, the study of what we're capable of. And that's when I learned more about positive psychology, not this idea of just being positive thinking, you know, positive thoughts and having that magically change things, but, you know, learning about neurotransmitters, neuroplasticity, actual reformation of the circuitry of the brain, and how we can use that to change our emotional state. And the emotional state is really what, you know, charges the full state of our being. And I just think all of that, I learned a lot of really amazing things through how much we studied positive psychology in our course. What was it? The Ultimate Optimism. What was that? Do you remember the first book that we read?
Oh, Optimism. Martin Seligman's book.
Yes.
And it was, what was that book called?
It'll come back to me.
Yeah. It's just hitting my brain. But Martin Seligman has several books out, and he was the president of the American Psychological Association in the 90s. And when he came in, that's when he started to shift the focus again on let's shift the focus on a positive psychology. And there began more research into what positive psychology actually is the study of optimal human flourishing versus pathology. So it's the question of what makes life worth living. Why are some people happier than others? And it's the question of what is working versus what is wrong. So it's the study of several people are born into a difficult situation. Why is it that some people flourish while others continue to struggle? And it's not a judgment. It's just the study of what is that? What is resilience? What is this? What is it that the mind might be doing differently in a particular situation versus another person's life? And really,
can I interrupt real quick and say one example that really stood out when we were studying that was when Robert brought up, there's two brothers, and one of them, and they have an alcoholic father. One of them goes in the direction of, alcoholism himself. The other one completely opposite, lives a life of non-substance abuse and thriving. And you ask them, how did you end up on this path? This one says, my father is an alcoholic, therefore I'm an alcoholic. And the other one is, my father was an alcoholic, therefore I've chosen this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an example, I feel, of what you just said.
It's a perfect example. I actually put that example in my book because it's truly, I love that example. And, when you look at, there's this mega study in positive psychology that sort of summarizes the study of positive psychology, of happiness, of flourishing, resiliency. And it's, if you imagine a pie and you cut the pie down the middle, 50% of our happiness set point is going to be based on our DNA. It's like some people, they seem happy all the time, and others, maybe lean into a little bit more of that pessimism. And then we have 10% of that pie is our happiness is going to be based on the circumstances of our life. Are we single? Are we married? Where do we live? What job do we have? What's the color of our hair? Whatever. What are our relationships like? What's our bank account look like? So that'll be 10%. Once our needs are met, we have to have our needs met. Mm-hmm. And then the other 40%, basic needs. Yeah. Make sure you can have food and shelter and, you're cared for and you feel secure. And the other 40% of our happiness is based on our choices. Now, the interesting thing is that we know with epigenetics, we know with neuroscience that we can actually, the way that we perceive something, our beliefs can change the way that our DNA lights up. So that 50%, which we before thought was maybe like a stuck set point, our interpretation styles, our beliefs, our lifestyle can actually influence that now. So really it's 90% of that pie is our happiness is based more on how our brain processes our life and the world around us, how our brain actually processes it versus the conditions of it once our basic needs are met. So we have a lot of room. So really positive psychology is teaching us how to process or interpret our life in a more resilient, hopeful, optimistic way. And that's really the difference when you look at people who are happy or unhappy, who are lucky or unlucky. There's even studies on lucky and unlucky people. It really comes down to their expectancy, because we know that we have this reticular activating system in our brain, so that what we already believe, we see more of that in the world. So if we tend to be a pessimistic person, whether that's part of our DNA, part of the environment we grew up in, whatever it might be, before the 90s, we were actually told, you're sort of stuck that way, sorry. And now we know, wait a minute, we can actually change that through practice, what yoga is telling us, we can change that if we commit. So what we see, what we believe already affects actually what our brain will look for in our environment. And our brain is always looking for evidence of what we believe. So to change our psychology, a positive psychology is really changing the practice of changing how we interpret our life and what we actually believe on the inside. And that was a huge thing for me, because when I took the test, when I attended my positive psychology program, we had to take this test of where we are on the scale of pessimism, optimism. And this was not that long ago, by the way. I'm just sharing with people. I was such a pessimist that it was like the red, like ding, 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 like go seek help immediately. Because pessimism leads to a lot of problems in our life, right? Hopelessness, helplessness, illness, anxiety, depression. Like it's not a great thing, right? So
I will say one thing I did learn about pessimism in that book, and I want to get right back to where you are.
Oh, Learned Optimism. That was the name of the book.
Thank you. Yes, Learned Optimism. Totally learnable.
Yeah.
One funny thing about pessimism, there were studies done in that book where more pessimistic people recalled events more true to form than overly optimistic people. You know, rose-colored glasses in hindsight kind of distorted a little bit of truth, but I just thought
pessimistic people tend to be right more often, I think it said, but optimistic people tend to be happier. So it's like we have to decide, you know, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? So I was like, yeah, I think I'd rather be happy. But yeah, it's a really fascinating thing, positive psychology. So now there's like actual research on this stuff, whereas it's not this, you know, self-help is one thing, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not just like, you know, just like ideas and concepts. There's actually rigor and science behind it, you know? And so that makes it a little bit more substantial for certain people that want that. Yeah. I always say that positive psychology is sort of the science of yoga, because they're finding out things that the yogis or the, you know, the sages were like contemplating and experiencing and uncovering without science, but we're teaching. But some people really want that, you know, that science. So it's a great combination.
Can you give an example of like a yogic? Is that kind of like bhavana?
Well, like right off my bat, I think about bhavana too, but I think about samskaras. Like samskaras in yoga are considered deep impressions, deep habits. Like if I lean into anxiety, that's a samskara, that's a pattern in my physiology and my outlook and my interpretation. Samskara means pattern or habit. That's the same thing as a neural pathway. Mm-hmm. So science says you have these neural pathways, these grooves in your system, that when you think something again and again and again, you default into that thought, or you default into that behavior. That's the exact same thing of samskara. Mm-hmm. And then bhavana is like, it's that the way that your brain processes, it's what you believe. So it's kind of the same thing as that reticular activating system. What you put your faith in, because bhavana is faith or belief, you're nearer to. What you believe, you will experience and see more of. And that's what we know about the reticular activating system and the, you know, confirmation bias and things like that science are discovering. So it's really fascinating that they...
Mm-hmm. I love talking about samskaras. You know, it's such a great... I learned that it meant groove. Yeah. You know, so like every time you repeat this one pattern or thought, it's a deeper groove and a groove and a groove. And then as you practice the opposite, what is that? Pratipakta bhavana?
Pratipakta bhavana. Yeah. Alternate viewpoint or
Yeah. So as you do the opposite or something different, then you fill in that groove so it doesn't become as much of a default. You know, there's always going to be a little something there. But what you were just saying about all of that, the repatterning of your beliefs and how it just goes back to me, and I just love listening to you talk about this. I mean, you had such formal training that it just flows out of you really well. We were talking before about the Purusha, so the unchanging, and the property always changing, and how, you know, not having a center and a realization and experience of Purusha, being so far away from that and attached to beliefs and ideas and everything else, and the disconnect causing suffering. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the fact of to the studies of positive psychology and how, basically kind of be repeating yourself, how the samskaras and those neural pathways, we can use the practice of positive psychology practices to undo or reprogram to get us back more to that experience of peace, getting us back there. So I kind of just said it, but I want you to talk a little bit more in depth about that, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's a big concept for people to understand, and I think we could all hear it over and over and over and over again anyway.
I know. Well, it is interesting. And I was thinking, Robert used to say replacement therapy.
Yeah.
So this idea of, but here's what science says. So, and here's what yoga says too. So once you have a neural pathway, and that's a big word for just pattern. Once you have a default or a pattern of, like, say someone says to themselves, I'm not good enough, or I can't do something. If you say that enough times, you fall into saying that all the time, and you start to believe that. And once you say that enough, your brain stops looking for answers. So that becomes a pattern in your mind body. It's a neural pathway. That pattern will never go away. Once it's really, really taken root, it never goes away. It goes to sleep. It can go like dormant, which is what yoga says, the kleshas. It can go dormant, that pattern. So we have to be awake in our life to pay attention to when that might pop up again. But it gets easier. So I think about the idea of, if I say to myself, I'm not good enough, it's like there's a ball, there's a peak, and there's a mountain peak top and the mountains down here. If the ball is at the top, it will roll down that side of the mountain of that thought that I'm having of I'm not good enough. It just rolls down. It's so easy. I don't even have to think about it. The ball just goes. There's massive momentum behind that thought. But the ball's at the bottom of the hill or the bottom of the mountain, I have to push it up. That's the idea of the new pathway. So I have to become conscious and diligent and committed and practice to that new thought or that new belief or that new behavior. And as I push that ball up the hill, at some point I reach the peak and it becomes really easy. There's momentum behind that. But as I do that, the old way goes to sleep, but it doesn't go away. So it's just important that we know that this is why some people will get discouraged and go, well, I've been working so hard, but this thing keeps coming up. It's like, yeah, because for a long time, we might have thought or believed that. But with practice, with consistency, that will go to sleep. Now, in positive psychology, the way that I learned it was we have this core self inside of us. We have this spark of genius in all of us. We have this, my teacher called it our ideal self. We all have it. Like when we get these hits of intuition in our life about how we want to express ourselves or who we want to be or what's possible for us. That's your core self talking to you. Now, around that core self, we start to develop fears. I'm not good enough. Somebody says something to us and we have a limiting idea or belief about who we are and what we're capable of. And that core self starts to get walled off. And then we don't want anybody to see our fears, to see that fear that we're not good enough. So we start to develop a facade. Maybe we have that I can't do anything personality. We have people. I remember there was this girl that I knew early on in my recovery and when I was recovering from my alcoholism and starting on that journey. She was super needy. And she always let everybody know that she needed stuff, that she needed help. And she was kind of like, I thought, she's so weak. Because I had this facade around my core self that you could never ask for help. You always had to be strong. I had to never let anybody see that I was scared. And so I saw her facade as weak and mine as strong. So not only now am I walled off from my own core self, but now I'm judging everybody else and I'm walled off from any real connection with anybody else. And so the process, I think, of positive psychology or awakening or freedom is we have to break free of those facades. We have to clean those out. We have to purify and then face our fears, and tell ourselves a new story. And identify our own core values. And this is something that yoga talks about with our Vijnana, with our inner, our life preferences, like what's really true for me. And this takes a lot of courage to A, define that, and B, live that. So whether it's yoga or positive psychology, there is a belief that there's a wisdom within, and we develop these patterns that wall us off from it, and we become identified with those patterns.
That's perfectly said.
Yeah.
You can keep going. I just wanted
no,
to
that's it. So
bring emphasis to that.
Yeah. That's it.
We all have an inner wisdom, and these patterns that we develop wall us off from that.
It's true. You know, and so those patterns don't really go away. And this is not a bad thing. It's just like, oh, and one of the things that yoga teaches is as you become wiser, as you stay on this path of just being in taking time each day to be with yourself. That's really all it is. Just take time each day to be with yourself, you know, and to ground into who you are, whatever process that is for you. You know, as you do that, it becomes easier and easier and easier to recognize when you are suffering. You get this like awareness of, oh, I'm suffering. And you know how to get yourself out of suffering, and you know how to avoid future suffering. And this isn't really, we can talk about it, but it's that experience of just being with yourself every day. You know, having a teacher is so important, but you gain this wisdom. It's like, now I know when I have anxiety, when I'm really, really anxious, there's some suffering going on. I'm just clued. I used to think there was something wrong with me. Like, oh gosh, why am I still anxious? Now it's, oh, there's some suffering going on. I'm either linked up to those stories, or I'm linked up to this old idea, or I'm linked up to the belief I'm not good enough. And I have to separate myself from that. And there's that practice of delinking. So it's just good to have that awareness, because we still stay human. We could study positive psychology all day. We could study yoga all day, do our best practices, and we all try our best. And we're still at the end of the day human, and we're going to have these experiences. So it's just recognizing that suffering is feedback, and it can wake us up. And so is joy, right? So it's not like we're talking about suffering, but that is a human thing.
I just want to point out something, you know, when you talk about, I think sometimes people they haven't found a place where they can get comfort unless they understand how to manage everything externally. So those of us, me included, at times constantly controlling the external worlds, because that's what gives us peace when we can manage it all. At times, you know, I and others don't realize that we have that inner wisdom. We have a guide. We have something that will, like you said, taking time every day to be with ourselves. Many answers are here, you know? Yeah. So it can take a little bit of stress off you trying to figure everything out in life, to have the experience of, like, that's why these little successes are so important in coaching. You know, like, oh, you know, let's get some clear reflection from somebody of something that of my wisdom that's coming up that maybe I didn't even recognize or realize, pointing that out and following that guidance, and learning to trust ourselves more and more. And then we don't, like you mentioned last time in our last interview, you were constantly trying to control everything that created your anxiety and how to manage it externally, you know. And I feel like the practice of yoga and the practice of getting, you know, creating wholeness is learning to be with yourself. And sometimes it has to be this much at a time, you know, because it can be really uncomfortable and just too much for somebody to slow down if all they're used to doing is running so fast. But little by little, as they start to sense this, then they can more easily let go of some control here, and trying to find all of the answers that are going to help them get, you know, work through their depression, get through their anxiety, manage this, manage that, all these things that can be overwhelming and draining. That there's lots of science and practices to prove so many things, and you can eat this and you can do this and all these things to make you feel better, when most importantly we need to develop this trust and sense of our inner GPS, that we have one. you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, in our society, I mean, when I first learned about these practices, I thought, no way can I do these. My mind was too anxious.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't sit still. In fact, I didn't even like yoga. It's like, it's too slow for me, you know, or whatever these practices. And, you know, we want the quick fix, and our brain wants that. Our brain wants the quick fix, and our brain wants us to survive. It's like, we cling to our discomfort or our comfort zone, even if it doesn't make us happy, because the evolutionary process has designed us for survival. And we have to rise above or grow beyond that predisposition for survival. Because when you look around, we're actually okay. That fight or flight that is kicked in is like, most of the time we don't need it to be on such hyper alert. So we need to somehow evolve beyond that. And that's going to require, like you said, each of us to come to that place where we can at least try to be still, to lean into the discomfort. And one of the things that I learned early on was to ask myself this question, which I didn't do perfectly, and I didn't even understand it at first really that much. But I would ask myself, who am I without this thought? Who am I without this fear? Because that fear, that thought is temporary. And it sounds esoteric and it sounds like out there for some of us, but it really, for me, it helped ground me. It was just like a question that brought me back into my body, into my heart, into, you know, here and now, like considering another viewpoint, an alternative viewpoint, instead of chasing that thought. Who am I without this thought? You know, who am I without, just who am I? And it's like, there's that prayer, you know, be still. I just lost it. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. And then my teacher used to say, you know, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And if we could just find our way, maybe from the bigger sentence, like, who am I without this thought? Eventually we get down to that place of I am. And so it's you know, but it's just being willing to engage in the discomfort. And it still comes up for me. Yesterday, I had such a day that I was so full of discomfort and so confronted with something I knew I needed to do, an action I needed to take, and I was afraid. And the discomfort was there. But I couldn't, the option for me isn't there to push it away as much anymore because of the practices. And I grew tremendously from that experience. Today, I was sharing with someone that I feel like, although the situation is difficult, it's not what I would have wanted. I feel like I grew stronger in myself because of it. So, you know, just having that awareness, that willingness to sit with that, to recognize and know that the quick fixes usually are just, they aren't real, you know, for most of us. And I shared this morning in a talk, in a little training I did here in this group, that when I first started my yoga, my physical yoga practice in the Anusara style, you know, my first teacher would say, when you roll out your yoga mat, you know, and the yoga mat of life, when you wake up in the morning, basically, right? You're either remembering who you are or you're celebrating who you are, because you need to be doing one of those each day. Some days we forget. So I need to just be remembering who I am. Who am I? Who am I without this thought? Or celebrating it, because some days you wake up and you just feel alive. You just feel connected, grounded, whatever the word is. And early on, I had to do more of the who am I? What is this? Feel grounded. So, yeah.
I feel like that, as far as like my coaching, me personally, what works for me, and even how I could use that working with my clients, is the who am I think it resonates with me because I've studied enough of this to, you know, introspect into the I am and the Soham. That's what my little tattoo is, like, Soham right here. But also for those who are kind of like newer onto this path and are just, you know, like learning for the very first time how to sit with discomfort. How am I without that thought? How am I feeling right now without that one thought?
Yeah, you could use that too,
you
definitely.
know. And for me, it's like, because going, and it's going to be different for different people, but the who kind of can take you into this very philosophical sort of thing. And when you're just learning how to do things a little differently, it's like, how am I when I just say stop?
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so thank you
yeah.
for that. That's
That's a good insight. One thing, as you were sharing that, I was thinking, because in my book, in the seventh principle, I share an exercise which is kind of a mix of positive psychology and yoga psychology.
mm-hmm.
And it's basically, you write about three people. It's identifying, it's helping the person. This is what I did. Identify that core self I was talking about. Because if I say to you, you know, if you're struggling or you're suffering with anxiety, like, or low self-esteem, or just whatever it might be, and I say to you, what are your strengths? Most of the time we can't come up with them. We're like, I don't know, but I can tell you everything that I think I'm worried about, you know. Like when people ask me what my strengths are, I was like, I don't know. I make my bed every day. Like, what's a strength, you know? Um, but if you write about three people that you admire, and just, it could be a paragraph, a page, just what do you admire about them? And then you circle all of those positive character traits that you love about that person.
Mm-hmm.
And you take another piece of paper and you write them all out. Like, she's, you know, a benefit finder. She's kind. She speaks her truth. She's steady. She's loving. She's confident. Or you can say he, or whoever it might be. You have this long list of strengths. And then you write about a time in your own life where you felt you were at your best. Like, when did I really feel I was in my skin? I really felt comfortable. And you write about that. And then you circle all the strengths that you see in your own story. And you write those on a separate piece of paper, all those strengths. And then you look at this big long list that you have now of character strengths. And you pick 4 to 8 of those that really resonate with you, that you're like, I feel like that feels like my core self. It doesn't mean we're living them right now, but those feel like me. And then you can make affirmations. I am confident, because now you've gotten affirmations that are really vibrating, really feeling like they're you. Instead of someone just saying, hey, say I love myself every day. And you're like, you know, I don't know if I want to say that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we should, I know it's nice to say that, but I was saying at the beginning, for me, the confident one was so huge. And I remember what I would do with this exercise is I had my 4 to 8, and I would pick one every day, and it was almost always the confident one. And I would write in the morning in my journal, I am confident. And then I would think about my day ahead. And sometimes my day included, you know, scary things that I had to do that made me uncomfortable, or great things, or just everyday things. But I would write about what does it look like for me to be confident in my day? Mm-hmm. So now I'm living from my core self. Like, how do I behave? How do I walk? How do I talk? How do I respond confidently when someone challenges me? Mm-hmm. And so it's just this idea of kind of vision, bhavana, affirmation,
feeling
mantra.
In your body. Like the feeling
it
in your body is so huge, which is why I really like that. How am I? Like, if I'm thinking negatively right now, how am I? If I'm actually thinking positively, how am I? Like, what is this vibration? What am I feeling cellularly, emotionally? Because that is what we can cultivate and make our stronger, you know, sort of experience. And when you are, you know, more in a sense of confidence because you've been practicing it, even just in your mind, you know, you've been visualizing this, and it becomes a reality. But you get there easier, and you draw things towards you easier when you set yourself up for that emotional recognition.
Absolutely. It's that Sutra 121. Yeah. Where it's like, if you can feel it and see it, because everything's created twice. And I always say we live here first before we live in the world. We all live in our own mind first. And so all the great teachers that I read always say our mind has to arrive at our goal before we do. If our mind doesn't arrive there, it's really hard to get there if we don't believe it, if we don't feel it. And so our mind has to arrive there, and clarity about what you want in your life and what you want to feel is really the beginning of creation. Clarity is that beginning of creating anything in your life. And if we spend our life saying, I don't want that, I don't want to feel that way, we're really not creating anything new. We're just resisting what we don't want. And so getting clear on what we want and how we want to feel and show up I think is why that exercise can be so powerful. Like, well, at least I have some way of, there's some clarity here, and then that evolves. But when you rehearse something in your mind, or you feel it in your mind through visualization, like I was saying about, I'm going to be confident today, how that looks. Mm-hmm. Then when you go and live it, it's like, it's not the first time you've done it. And that's really powerful, but it still can be uncomfortable, of course. Mm-hmm. So I love this conversation.
I do too. This makes me.
And we've got some people on with us, I noticed. Hello, everyone.
Oh, cool.
This is the weird thing. I don't see it in the Zoom here, but I see Charlotte's there, Mary, Cindy, Lisa, Eric was there, Danielle. But thanks you guys for being here. And after this, you can share your comments or your questions. I can't see from here to get better at technology. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about this, and any insights or questions, or just sharing. You all have so much wisdom and knowledge about all of this too. We'd love to hear it. And we're going to do this again. So Nikki is Nikki Aiello. Nikki, what's your website? Because I have it here, but better if you.
It's Nikki Aiello. So it's spelled NIKKIAIELLO.com.
Okay. And I'll put it in the comments here as well when I put the title. Yeah. And so Nikki is a recovery and life transition coach. And so, yeah, and my website is joy@joystonecoaching.com, but you all see me in here. So,
but I'm going to be sharing this with my people too. So,
yeah,
and I just want to say once again how, or if I even said this once before, I so appreciate talking to you again about so many of these things. Since I haven't, my path has just been a little bit different, than yours. Yeah. You've been just going pretty, you did a positive psychology course straight from, Yoga Sutra, philosophy, all of that, and then right into coaching. And I've had some different sort of shifts along the way, opening my yoga studio and
awesome.
moving and all these different things. But I just love getting back to, even just the language of yoga and, the philosophy of it, and hearing you just, it's like, it's like I'm, learning getting back to speaking Italian.
Yeah.
I know once I get into it, it'll come back a little bit. And I feel like that with you right now, just, getting back to so many of those terms and ideas and philosophies. They're so great. And so thanks for all that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love talking to you too. This is wonderful. And I think, all our, obviously I know, but our paths are awesome, whatever, I've had a lot of twists and turns too, believe me.
I know.
One thing I want to say is that it's like these teachings, when we're talking about them, one thing is, for people who are on their path too, it's like, for me, when I started to hear these teachings, they felt true to me. And I always not challenge people, that's the wrong word, but invite people to say, make sure that, these feel real for you and land for you and true for you. We're just sharing what our experiences and what we study and what I coach and you coach, and what has helped me so much and helped so many people that we work with. But make sure it lands for you. And I just love that, because when I started to hear these teachings, like there's more right about you than wrong. What you seek is already inside of you. Confidence is your nature. I was like, what? Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. That feels real, versus you suck, figure it out and try to fix yourself. So anyways, well, thank you, Nikki. And I'm going to put all your info in here. We will do this again.
Thanks,
and I love you. So I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to get this out of Facebook. It might disconnect us.
Okay.
Because I don't know how to do that. Oh, stop live stream. All right. Bye, everyone.
Maybe bye. I don't know if I'm leaving too.